Hear these two lovely stories of healing from the Gospel of Mark. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders, named Jairus, came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she may be healed and alive." So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, "If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed." Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt her body as she was freed from suffering. Stay tuned, we're having technical difficulties. Oh, in case you're wanting to know, Kevin's changing the battery. That's what's going on. We don't want any scandal.
I'm changing the diaper.
All right. Nice knowing you. All right. Let us continue. At once Jesus realized that power had gone out of him. He turned around in the crowd and he asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, trembling with fear, and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead," they said. "Why bother the teacher anymore?" Overhearing what they had said, Jesus told him, "Do not be afraid, just believe." He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw the commotion with the people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. After he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately the good girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat. So what we have here are these beautiful stories of healing. And I want us just to take a look at what's taking place so that those of us who are here, who find ourselves in a position of healing, that we can learn from this and help us on our journey. The first thing in order to experience healing is clarity. We have to know what the problem is, right? We go to a doctor and they run tests. The doctor asks us about our symptoms. And then after all that is done, then the doctor gives us a what? You recognize the gnosis? Comes from the Greek word? Yep. Diagnosis. Intimate knowledge of. You see? In order to get a diagnosis, in order to start treating, we have to have clarity. For those persons who are recovering from addiction, step one is what? We admitted we were powerless over our addiction, that our lives had become unmanageable. Before you can experience healing, you have to be clear about what is wrong. And typically, especially those who are recovering from addiction or many other types of things, you're the last one to know, right? Everyone around us knows. They've been telling us, and we tell them that they're just not being supportive or they're out of their mind. Before we can experience healing, we must have clarity. The second thing is healing requires risk. You have to take a risk. Let's look at the woman who had a hemorrhage for 12 years. 12 being a number of completeness. So it may have been literally 12, or it just may have been for a very, very, very long time. She had to take incredible risk to walk through this crowd and to touch Jesus' garment. Why is that? In the Hebrew tradition in the first century, blood was considered unclean. So when women were going through their menstrual cycle, they were in a state of uncleanness, so therefore they could not go into the public places. After the menstrual cycle was finished, then they went through a ritual cleansing, which helped them now to be able to go into public. That's probably what Bathsheba was doing on her rooftop at night when David saw her from his palace wall. So not only was this woman suffering physically, but she was suffering emotionally. Have you ever had a chronic disease? Do you know anybody who has a chronic disease? Do you know how hard it is? Do you know how it affects your brain? To wake up every day sick? But not only did it affect her emotionally, but it affected her mentally and it affected her socially. For she would not be able to be in public as she wanted to be, or if she were in public, she would have to keep it a secret, because if anybody found out, then everybody she touched would be unclean as well. So she sees Jesus walking with the crowd, and she thinks to herself, if I just touch his garment, I can be healed. That was a risk too, right? Have you ever been in a situation in life where you've tried everything and then you become desperate? I mean, it sounds good to us at this point because we know how the story goes. We know Jesus was an amazing human being. But put yourself in that moment. Have any of you ever ordered the healing tower from one of the televangelists? You know it was probably a big waste of money, but you're desperate, right? So she goes and takes the risk to touch the rabbi who's surrounded by people and making him what? Unclean. She took that risk. Well, the story tells us that immediately, Jesus felt the energy drained from his body. He knew someone had been healed, but he didn't know who. So he said, who touched me? Who touched my garment? And his disciples are looking at him in disbelief, like, Jesus, look at all the people around you. They're completely surrounded, and you're asking, who touched you? But when the woman saw what was going on, it says that she came and she fell at his feet. And she took the risk to tell him the whole truth. If we're going to experience healing and resurrection in our lives, if we're going to become whole human beings, we must be willing to be honest and tell the whole truth. There's a difference between telling the truth and honesty. Telling the truth can sometimes leave out other facts. You're not lying, but you're not telling everything, right? She took the risk to tell him and to be honest. If we want to experience the power of miracle, the power of healing, the power of resurrection, the power of becoming whole, we must become honest, primarily with ourselves. Sometimes it can be risky. I know in my own life experience, looking deeply within myself, is scary at times. As I've counseled people over the years, and we get to that place where now we're really getting focused on what's wounded inside their soul, they come to a crossroads where they will continue or they'll make an excuse to stop. Those of you who do counseling know what I'm talking about. It's risky to look inside. I have heard people say, I want to look inside, but I don't want to because I am what? Afraid. The passage says that when she came to Jesus and fell at his feet, she was afraid. We have been taught in Western culture, in Western religion, that God is angry most of the time. And that God is always looking to punish us for some reason. And it's interesting that when we need the divine's presence the most in our lives, we're afraid to approach. Regardless of what you might be afraid of, if you want to experience healing and wholeness and resurrection in your life, you must take the risk to be honest and to tell the whole truth. Then it says, immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from suffering. Can you imagine what that would feel like? Some of you know what it feels like when you've been suffering and now you're liberated from it. You don't realize how much time and energy you spent trying to become well until you don't have to anymore. And Jesus says to her, your faith has made you well. Now go in peace. Faith. Don't have time to spend a lot of time on it today, but we also have a strange belief in our Western religion that when we are facing incredible obstacles, that the best thing to do is just give it to the Lord, and the Lord will do it for us. I hate to disappoint you. God's not codependent. God's not going to do it for you. The reason why you're having this struggle, the reason why you're experiencing these things is so that you can learn something from it, so that through this experience you discover how incredibly powerful you are. Through this experience you discover all the incredible ways that you need to heal, and you discover this incredible power within your soul and your spirit to overcome all the obstacles that come your way. You cannot know that, gnosko, experientially if God does it for you. Most every case of every miracle I've ever read in the Bible, a whole lot of work had taken place before the miracle had happened. This woman's faith made her well. Faith, she spent everything she had with doctors. Faith that she could walk through a crowd as an unclean woman and touch the garment of Jesus. Faith that she could fall at his feet and tell the whole truth. And now, because of her actions, because of the things that she did along with her faith, she experienced healing. Healing requires touch. Before we go there, healing requires, and resurrection requires, courage. As Jesus was dealing with this woman, someone from Jairus' house came and said, I'm sorry, but your daughter is dead. You don't need to bother the rabbi anymore. Can you imagine? Some of you, unfortunately, have had to. That kind of news, and you receive it in a public place, Jesus must have seen his eyes. And what does he say to him? Do not be afraid, and believe. So Jesus let the crowd go. He took just as his disciples and Jairus, and they went to his house. When they got to the house, all the mourning was taking place, and it was wailing and doing the things that was a part of the custom of those people. And Jesus walked in and says, what is all this commotion? She's not dead, but simply asleep. And they laughed at him. But in spite of their laughing at him, he still did what he needed to do. Resurrection, healing, requires courage. I cannot tell you how in my own life experience and all the people that I've talked to over the years, how when you step out to experience and to resurrect yourself, to recreate yourself, that sometimes it's the people who are closest to you are standing around laughing and say, good luck with that. Am I right? I'll believe it when I... There you go. Are you serious? And sometimes their skepticism is warranted. Sometimes we've been trying to heal over and over again. This time I'm going to do it. And we don't, this time, yeah, and they're skeptical. But even though the crowd around us may be laughing at us, typically our greatest critic is where? Inside our own head. Are you kidding me? How many times have you tried this? It works for everybody else, but it will never work for me. Well, If you want to truly experience wholeness and healing and resurrection in your life, then you have to have courage. In spite of the negativity, in spite of the mocking, in spite of the discouragement, you go ahead and you do what you need to do. It takes courage. It takes a lot of courage to do that. Jesus went into the little girl's bedroom with his disciples and with her parents, and he dismissed all the rest of the people in the house. This is important. Those of you who are recovering from addiction, you know that there's something in your meetings or in your therapy. People, places, and what? Things. It's one of the hardest things for people who are trying to recover from addiction have to face is they have to leave their friends. They have to go and find another group of people to hang out with. Sometimes it requires leaving the family. I had a client at Phoenix South who started smoking crack at age 8 with his grandmother. I had another client who, when he turned 18, his dad gave him a kilo of cocaine. That is a lot of cocaine. In order to experience the resurrection and have the courage to be able to become whole and to become healed, sometimes we have to have the courage to let the people around us go who are going to interfere with the process. And in order to do that, you feel isolated and alone. But when you take that risk, when you have the courage to do that, you discover another group of people who have possibly been what you've been through, another group of people who've been well trained to help you in the process, and you discover that there's a whole community that will surround you and comfort you and encourage you and be there when you're vulnerable and when you're weak. They will pick you up when you fall and praise you when you stand tall. Am I right? These are the people that you have to have around you. And in order for this little girl to experience resurrection, she had those who were closest to her and Jesus there with her. And then he takes her by the hand and he says, "Little girl, stand up." And she pops up out of bed, very much alive. If you want to experience resurrection in your life, if you want to experience healing and wholeness, then you have to what? Stand up. Have the courage to do whatever it takes to become the person you know you need to be. Another thing that I've discovered is that in order for healing to take place, you need touch. In both stories, the woman touched Jesus' garment. Jesus went into the little girl's room and held her hand. What I'm about to say is not to be offensive to any doctors in the house, but what I've discovered over the years is that doctors are the wonderful technicians. Once they know what is wrong, and you're in the hospital, and they do the surgery, and they repair what is broken, they've done their job, but it's during recovery that you have who present? The nurses. Doctors are the technicians. Nurses, I believe, are the healers. Those of you who do physical therapy, it's your touch on this human being that helps them to heal and to become whole. Touch is vital. It takes community to experience resurrection and to become whole. You see. During the story, when Jesus asked, "Who was it that touched me?" and he insisted on knowing, I asked myself the question, why was he doing this? What purpose did this serve? Was he thinking he was exploited somehow? Someone didn't ask permission first? As I gnosko, I know experientially this essence, this spirit of Jesus that I have studied and lived with for all of my life. As I know intellectually from all that I've read about this Jesus, I don't think it had anything to do with that. What I think it was is that he needed it to be personal. He needed to know who it was. And the story tells us that she fell down at his feet afraid. I believe that Jesus needed to know who she was so that she would not only experience physical healing, but spiritual as well. Can you imagine now that she's physically healed, that maybe the guilt would follow? I should have said something. I know I shouldn't have. Oh my God. No, he needed to make sure she was okay. And he calls her daughter. It's a term of endearment. It's a term of intimacy. Daughter, your faith has made you well. What does this tell me as a spiritual being, one who knows God? Is that God takes our healing, our wholeness, and our resurrection personally. God is not aloof, out in the heavens somewhere. But God is as close to you with every beat of your heart and with every breath you take. Your healing, your becoming whole, is personal. Then the last thing, after the little girl was, while the little girl was lying in bed and Jesus took her hand, he says, "Get up. Feed her." Get up, feed her. In order for us to live the miraculous life that we desire in our deepest inner selves, you got to get up. You got to do something. You've got to be willing to take the risk. But you also have to then be nurtured. Find the people, find the community, find the support groups who will nurture you, who will feed you. Not the ones who are going to mock you and shame you. Let them go. Toxic people will do nothing but create toxicity. But there are angels all around us who are here for us. And in order for us to truly become the people that God has created us to be, we got to get up. It's no going into the closet and praying that God will do it for us. No, you've got to get up. Be clear about what it is that you need to do. Be honest about it. Take the risk. Have the courage. And allow yourself to be touched deeply by the love and the kindness of a host of angels all around you. And it's then that we can start to become the miracle that God created us to be. All right, is Chris here? There she is. I'm going to ask Chris to come and help us with communion. So, when the little